Okay, I think that should be us live. And just checking the mic's coming through. Good. Alright, so recently we did one tutorial on kind of coming up with green sculpting and kind of how to put in interesting slopes and puddles on greens, etc. One of the other things I got asked a bit about, I wasn't really sure about doing any more, but I've had enough people asking about bunkers and kind of how to make them look good. I'm going to start this with a caveat that I wouldn't say I'm in any way the best at this, but I think I know enough to kind of give do's and don'ts. Now, there are different ways in which you can do this. One is, now this is the hole that we were looking at last time. We had this path 3, if you remember, where you've got a couple of big slopes to play with. You've got this pin in the middle that's kind of right on, almost on that middle spine. You could use backstop or not. You've got the one up here, which is on that back tier. And then you've got this one down here, which you can kind of play off that slope to get close to. In terms of bunkers and where to put them then. Now, for me there's two schools of thought, and there's one way I kind of tend to be inclined to, but it's not to say the other one's wrong. One is simply to look at where is a good location for a bunker, as in, hi David, where fits well with the land, and that kind of goes for this one, I think. One might be, and where's good strategically, i.e. how's it gonna force your whole design, etc. So we're going to look at both of those today and talk about a little bit pros and cons. We're going to look at some sculpting because I think that's where the most difficulty comes from. Certainly with bunkers, it was something that I found really difficult at the start, and actually you just get better with practice. Certainly my first CC course I think I did for that contest. No, this is a bunker tutorial. Not again, I did a green sculpting one last time. This one's just bunker tutorial. And talking through that. And I think the major thing I found is it's quite tricky to do. You just need to get a handle on size and sculpting and how much to work or not. Hi Dylan. Yeah, feel free to chime in, anyone with any comments or questions. I had a couple of people ask if I was going to do any more, and the one that kind of got a couple of requests for was bunkers. So we're going to look at this. So we're going to look at a bad example first. Now, you might think, well, actually, this spot here is going to be a really good spot for a bunker because anything that's pulled fast, well, it's probably going to end up here. And yeah, that's true, but let's have a look at putting a bunker in. Now, in terms of shapes we'll kind of work with, the main issue, let's put in a standard shaped bunker. So now you can obviously just do something like this, say. Looks okay, it's not the best one, or do we want to go for, I don't know, maybe we'll go for that one. And we'll pop it down, it's roughly where we want it to, but you'll notice it looks pretty dreadful. And in spite of the fact that the lighting on this hole is really good. So why does it look dreadful? Well, the main issue is that, well, from here to here, there's 1.7 feet of difference. Now if you look at, and from front to back, there's 1 foot, which means that if we end up in it, let's do a little play from here, and you can tell that that's not even remotely close to being a bunker. It's not caused us any problems, it's actually got a really good lie, well, relatively good lie, but I mean that's not troubling anyone. But everyone knows that, so what a lot of people will try to do therefore will be to hit sculpt, and we all kind of know about flatten. If you actually flatten a bunker at 0, it goes down because HP make a crazy game. So actually that's lowered it down. Now that looks a little bit better, but you might still think, well, it's still not very much, so we might go again. It's looking a little bit better, but it's still not quite right. And the main reason is that you haven't ever defined, and this is for me the biggest thing I see with kind of newer designers, and I would say with me as well, you haven't defined high edge and low edge, and kind of actually the bunker's just sitting there, and it's known as bathtub bunkers. You can kind of see why from here. It's just sloping into the middle, and it's not really, it's neither looking very good nor actually doing any good. So what we really want to do before we do any of our sculpting, let's say we'll just stick with this one. So we want to define, well, is it sitting in a hill? Like this one, if we're going to take the same brush, say, and move it to somewhere where, oh, wrong button. Let's say we move it somewhere which is a little bit better. I can't rotate it because I've got the wrong thing, but it still looks rubbish, but it's sitting in a better location. So what do we do to make this look a little bit better? Flatten before placing we'll get into, and we'll look at that and pros and cons. For me, actually, I prefer doing it afterwards. The main thing I would say with pretty much all of the things that I've learnt to do, don't be afraid of just use the blue brush, ignore the numbers, look at what it does, and let's just massage the land to get it roughly where we want. So, and I would say a good, and actually seeing as he's here, Dylan is a very good example of this, a good 90% of your work should be done outside of the bunker, probably. You don't really want to touch the sand on the inside, and actually when you do, now you'll see here as well, what we're going to end up doing, and we need to be careful of, is not really affecting our green slope, which is why this is actually a really bad place for a bunker, because with how we want the land to work here, it doesn't make much sense, but we'll use it as an example. The point of this was never to come up with a good hole, but let's say we lower the front, just a little bit to make it make more sense, and you'll notice we're not doing anything at all inside the bunker at the moment. Yeah, you're good at bunkering. You've got a very distinctive style. If ever I see one of your courses, I will recognise it pretty much instantly from the style of bunkering. Is it necessarily to everyone's taste? Maybe, maybe not. But I think it's getting better and better, and I thought it was a strength on Malibu. Don't know what your notes were on that course, but I liked it. So straight away we can see it from the tee a little bit more. We've got this little hill we've dug a bunker into. Hi OS. Now, and that's where kind of maybe many people will stop. We're then going to go into flatten, and I would suggest inside the bunker, for me, this fuzzy brush just once, click and drag, and don't really touch the edges as much as you can. So still holding the button the whole time and then let go. And that's going to be pretty much close enough. Like for the ones I've done on Kayuma, that's essentially it for most of it. The judges hated Malibu bunkers. Well, yeah. I didn't. I think they were good. I think they really kind of kept a lot of what made that course good was the bunkering. So I wouldn't take that one too to heart. Now, what you'll also see is that at the moment it looks a lot like we've just created a hill for this bunker to sit in. So I will then spend a lot of time going around and making those hills look pretty natural. Again, still the same brush. Because once you get used to sculpting and just making brush bigger and smaller, raise tool, flatten tool, life gets a lot easier. Hiya, Jeff. So we're going to bump up a lot of the land around this bunker. Now then, you'll see a lot of people will do this stage where they go just to the edge and bump it up by about a foot, maybe a foot and 3, something along those lines. Now, for me, I will do that, but it won't be anywhere near the first step at which I'll do it. I mean, this bunker is still looking pretty dreadful. It was always going to because it was in a bad spot. But we're making it look better and better and better just by making it make a little bit more sense with the land. This is the plan anyway. Hi, JC. JC, congratulations. Wes, commiserations. I mean, we've said it already this morning, but. And so all I'm really doing with this, now we've still got a stock bunker, and it's still not looking great, but at least it kind of makes sense. So what could you do from here on in? Well, for me, I'm still kind of tending to look at height differential. Now, 10 feet is huge. For me, you probably want to be looking at about 7 feet between the top of the lip and the bottom, but it's going to depend on the course. So we might now want to go, well, this bottom bit needs to be bumped up, or you might think, well, actually I've done that flatten, but this looks really steep. Don't be afraid to take the raise tool, go on the inside, have a little bit of a play and just maybe bump the middle bit up a little bit more, lower little bits. But I remember when I started with, I think Gang was a lot of what I was doing was taking this brush and going really painstakingly right around the edges and taking ages to do this on really intricate shapes, and it came out looking awful. And a large part of the reason is that you just overwork the sand, and after a while you just have to get rid of it and start over. So let's say we do that. Well, now again we've done that bathtubby thing. Even though we've got the high point and the low point, it's now going really deep into the bottom. So there's loads of things with this one I would definitely be getting rid of. Number one would be the standard shape. But you can also see that we've kind of got this impression of the land that we've made, and we've just laid the bunker over it. Now, before we move much further, I would be saying that this was never a good place to put a bunker in any case. So, where do we want to put a bunker on this hole? Well, actually, something here is perfect. It serves a purpose strategically. It's going to frame the hole. And we can just pop something down. Now, again, the shape is not going to be great for the moment. It's just a doodle. You'll also notice that I will tend to, for me, a lot of what I do is planning. So I might be putting little placeholders in here thinking there's a bunker and trying to visualize whether it makes sense or not. Now for me, the one that makes sense, well, the one at the back is going to give me a lot of depth perception of how far away that is and how far the back of the green is away. Because you can see from here, it's really hard to tell where does the green start and where does it finish. Maybe right at the front would therefore be good to define where the fairway apron is, etc. But I think this one, well, if we're trying to hit that slope and feed down, or feed down to here, or hit over there, this bunker is going to be in play for all of them. But we notice immediately the land is not great for it. So we've seen high point and low point. At the moment, our high point is around about here. Low point, I mean, it depends what size we're going for. So I'm going to go into raise and get rid of some of these mounds that we don't want, and just roughly prepare the land for what we want to do. Now this is not going to be perfect because there are different ways of doing bunkers, and we'll look at the other one as well, which is digging the whole thing before you start. But I'm just going to roughly try to get my high side and low side a bit better than it was, and probably get it a little bit more level than it is currently. So that means essentially trying to make this all just, without using flatten, because we're going to use flatten eventually, getting it somewhere like that looks a little bit better. Another thing that is worth mentioning that I definitely fell foul of with my first couple of courses, you've got to leave a good amount of space. Like this, I'd say bordering on too close, in order to be able to sculpt the back of the bunker up. Like if we looked at this one, look at how much behind the bunker we've given, pretty much just to make it look good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop some shapes down and do some really quick sculpting just to show what happens when you get too close to that, or when you go a bit further away. And with this one, we're going to do another way. We'll do small circle bunker. Yeah, do stop me if I'm going quickly or if I need to slow down a little bit. Now this bunker shape looks, let's face it, awful. So for me, the bottom of the bunker should always be relatively straightforward. It's the top where you can get a little bit more creative, because you tend to see bunkers kind of dipping down, have a kind of that little finger sort of thing coming in, and then maybe we'll go to somewhere around here. Personally, I've always liked using the measure tool for this. It means that I can pretty quickly work out, do I want to change anything or not? And you'll see me do that for all types of bunkers, whether it's a kind of cleaner style. So I've decided I want to make this one a little bit wider and a little bit more around the bottom. And I can work out, do I actually prefer that? I think I do. So at this point I might just go into the distance marker. Once you've got surfaces down, it gets a lot harder to clear these out. But before that, it's pretty easy. You just hammer the delete button and just move this around. So we've got a shape that looks like that. Get rid of those bits. I'm also still a little bit worried about this being a touch too close, so we'll probably drop that bit down a little. And for this, I mean, we've got quite a rugged course anyway. We don't want perfectly clean bunkers. So a little something like that maybe gives me a little bit more space to manoeuvre. Now again, not in any way a perfect shape. I'm going to do this in two ways. So the first way we're going to save. I mean, always feel free to, it's a good idea usually when you're learning stuff to save, come back to it later. We're going to do the same sort of style that I just did in terms of flattening afterwards and inside the bunker. Yeah, little hammer. And then once, so this one we were going to go around with a little circle brush. The little circle brush tends to be great for getting tight corners. You don't need to follow this in any way precisely, you'll see why in a second. Right, again, the first course I was doing, I would follow those little measure tools perfectly and take ages, and actually it looks worse. Generally speaking, I think the more time you spend on the sand part of bunkers, the worse it's usually going to be. We can then go back in and fill out some of these shapes a little bit more. And we're still just trying to work with this shape that we've brought. Now if you ever see it kind of going, try and find an example. If you ever see, let's say we placed this shape down and it doesn't quite make the shape you expect it to. So you see it's kind of not quite gone to the edge. Often that's just because it's a little bit too steep. It's not a problem, but it just means you want to be a little bit more careful when you're sculpting it. Let's go to the bottom there. So we've now got this bunker, which, I mean, I think we can all agree it's not perfect, but it's a better shape than the one we had. Oh, we've got clouds. Probably get rid of them. So, we're now going to do one little flatten on the inside. It's entirely up to you whether you want to do the sculpting outside or inside first. It really doesn't matter once you've got, as long as you've got a defined high point and low point. No, it is a little bit on mine as well, and I'm not quite sure why. Possibly because I'm recording as well. So yeah, sorry if it's dropping in and out. So we're going to do one little flatten, and it doesn't look great. So we undo. So the question is, has that happened because we've gotten too close to the edges? Probably. If you start right up here, the way I kind of view it is you're holding and dragging, so it's going to drag everything down to kind of the average point plus the bunker going down a bit. So it doesn't look great. Now, also you'll notice we've got this bit of sand here. I'll just give you another example of that. So we'll do all of this, and we'll hover over this bit. Now you see this bit right here, where the blue brush is reacting a little bit weirdly. Done it a bit better this time, but the reason it's not quite gone down where you'd expect it to be is because actually, although it shows, and you can see it when we go over the brushes, it shows that there's a brush everywhere, and it shows that there's sand everywhere. In actual fact, the game hasn't quite realised that there's bunker there, so it shows it because it's really close together, but in actual fact it's not. So we're just going to pop one more bunker brush down and it should react much better. With that in mind, we still overworked this bunker, so we're going to try once more. And feel free to always go back and redo, restart, whatever it might need. So in this case, we're actually going to start a bit further away from the edges, because I think that's what's causing the problem. You can go to a smaller size brush. Either is good. And I think for me that's looking a little bit better. Still not great up and around here, so we're going to go and fill in those little gaps that we've noticed that we're missing. So one click there, and I think probably one up here somewhere. Yeah, it's just gone down a little bit. Yeah, hopefully the stream is holding up a little bit. I can't actually see whether I'm dropping frames or not, just purely because I'm using OBS Studios rather than... it seems to be okay. Oh no, drop frames 33%. Great. If need be, I'll redo it again at some other point. Anyway, we're now going to go back and do just the edges, and we'll bump these up, and that will generally make it look a little bit better. Again, click and drag seems to work pretty well. And then it's a case of, well, we probably want to make this hill look a little bit more natural. We're going to bump this bit up. We've already got quite a big hill here, and we don't want to affect our green slope too much. But now we're getting a little bit further away from the edge. Again, still not looking at, in any way, still not looking at the numbers on the blue brush. It's not what we want to be focusing on. Now, still not escaping this, my notice that this does not look good, but it's getting better. So all we're doing here is really raising the land and trying to make it all make more sense. So you can see the land is sort of flowing down this way, and you've got this area that is now, okay, the bunker itself may not be great, but the area itself, the area it's in is pretty good for a bunker. I might drop little bits down in front, not much. Try and make this little area make more sense. And the fact that it's now rising up to this side, because and all of this is still just trying to create that hill to house the bunker and make it look a little more natural. Something like that, maybe. Okay, what I'm probably going to do at this point, we don't need them, is clear out the measure tools. Before we do, I might just pop down actually no, it'll do the auto flatten thing. So clearing out the measure tools then gives us a bit more of a look at what we've got. And let's get rid of all of these little bits. Feel like we're dropping frames all over the place, but I'm hoping it's still viewable. The way this hill just goes down so rapidly is just not quite what I want. And all of this is just feel and worth practicing with, and with sculpting you can always undo or redo. Okay, so we've got all of that. Now, what other tips can we give with bunkers? Well, looking on the inside, I'm still not happy with this. It's gone way too deep. So at this point I'm going to go back to the raise tool, and this is where you kind of decide whether do you want to keep it or not. I'm doing a lot of this on the major course at the moment, of working out whether something is right or not and just playing around with bunkers on the raise. It's something I definitely recommend. Now if I were wanting to make this easier for myself, the best way would probably just be to make the bunker deeper. And then we've got far more space to play with going high to low. As it is, we're going to stick with this because I think we can show the skill a little bit more. I'm going to go to our raise tool again. You'll see now this area looks better than, it's still a little bit up here, than down here. Let's bump that up a little bit. And the other thing, doing a slightly slower, smoother transition with the sand rather than going straight down, is it will make it way easier for this bit to be raised up, because it's not just all diving down into nothingness. And therefore we can make the bunker just look a lot scarier, even though we're not really touching the sand. No, sorry. I don't know why it's doing that. It's frustrating. Well, on the plus side, I mean, it is recording, so it will be able to go to YouTube. Now, let's say we wanted to get this all the way up to here. You have to look at what it does to the sand and whether it's even worth it. For me, probably not, but also kind of feeling at this stage that slope is now getting ridiculous. So if we select our pin and have a little look at it, it's started massively changing the way we want this to play. There is an easy way around it. If you get your, for me I like this one. This one's very sharp on the edges. This one's way too soft. If we get this, and we're going to highlight, we're going to advanced edit and highlight pretty much the whole bunker. And we're just going to drop it all down. So it means all of that sculpting will remain the same, but it will just soften that slope a little bit. And we can always put it back in. And it's quite nice to be able to do this and look from the tee at just like, well, that's where it is, and that's actually making that far flag pretty much blind. 1.6 probably works. Now that slope's a little bit more manageable. And it's kind of back to playing how we wanted it to. Hiya, Bill. Now we're probably still going to have to change some sculpting around here just to get it flowing and looking exactly like we want it to, but it'll work. And really, to be honest, a lot of it is just really just playing with little bits of sculpting and trying to get those where you want them to be. In all honesty, how many people are going to go into this bunker, and is it more visual than not? Pretty much visual, but if we decided it was too deep, well, we can just do a couple of quick clicks on this and bump up the bottom of it a little. Can run that down the front and just hold. That's looking a little bit better. Just keep having a look at it. But again, you'll notice just the ratio of the amount of work that was spent inside the bunker versus outside, and that's really where you need to prioritize your time. A lot of it is just making the thing look in any way natural around the edge. So that's one example. It's by no means a great bunker. That's not the intent, but it's to show you the process of how I'd go about it. Now let's say we're finding one final way of doing it is, and this is the way that Matt Fritsch has particularly used, is find myself a slope that will work. Doesn't even need to be anywhere near the hole. Tell you what, let's do one here, because then we get this kind of layered effect, which could be quite cool. And actually, if we're going to do that, let's go diagonally, so it's complementing the other bunker a little bit. Oof, we are dropping a lot. What can we do? Not quite sure how much I can do while I'm streaming, but to change this. Oh well, we'll get this one finished up and we'll see what we can do later. So let's say we were popping in one more bunker around about here. So we might do exactly the same sort of style. We'll have one little finger coming on down. Something like that. And we go back and that'll look okay. It's maybe not my favourite, but it works. Again, we'll probably bump up the land a little bit just before we start and just make it look like it's roughly sitting okay. Now, this is the way that I tried right at the beginning and found it really difficult, if I'm honest. You can basically dig out the bunker and do all the work that you will do inside beforehand and kind of reverse engineer it a little bit. So we can go to flatten, we'll take probably this brush because it tends to, and let's get a 1.4 say. And we're just going to trace around the inside of the bunker again, don't be too perfect. What I would say is if you're doing this sort of a little kind of finger, then leave more space than you think, because you can always go and flatten it more later, but the land will be easier to work with. So all of this is still holding, go a little bit larger than that, and then we can let go. And we've kind of got the bunker dug out. Now, it's still not perfect, you'll notice, like there's still going to be other bits of sculpting we'll do later, but you've done the bulk of the work. I will still probably play around with bits of this, because you can see by eye. I think the reason Matt does this is once the sculpting, once the bunker texture is in, it's actually really hard to see what the land is like underneath it. Whereas if you do it like this, you can kind of see exactly what you've got. Might make that a little bit softer. Might make that a little bit softer. Yeah, a lot of it is visual for sure. And once again, we're going to just pop surfaces down really quickly. And we'll go through. You can see this bit's really jagged, like they're quite steep edges. So we may have to work with that later, but we're going to race around the bunker. Fill in the middle. And then we start looking at the edges and seeing to what extent are they what we want. Well, you can go with the tiny brush. The tiny brush, you'll notice, kind of gives you more jagged edges. The bigger the brush, the smoother it's going to be. So if we pop a larger brush down here, we're more likely to get kind of a round, I guess slightly more harmonious edge. If we go with the little one, you get a few more you can get more tight twists and turns. Kind of for this sort of style, that's more what I like doing. And we might just eat into this side of it a little bit more and see how that goes. I mean, you've got an interesting shape there. A lot of it is just kind of play with it and get a look that you quite like. Yeah, I know it is. I'm going to finish up the stream in a minute and upload the video later. I'll go to the major coursework, and when I'm not recording, it'll be a bit quicker and better. And so if we take measure tools out again now, so you've now got 2 bunkers. You'll also notice you get this annoying rendering thing, which is they only really start popping really into focus at a certain point. Might depend. It's really just hit and miss as to when it is. Sometimes a lot of it's to do with how large the shapes are. So with this, because it's quite a small, it's quite narrow, that finger in the middle, it's going to make it a little bit trickier. Sometimes sculpting helps it to get away from it, but not by any means always. So I'd probably again bump the land up here, and you'll notice we're now starting to impact on the second bunker that we put down earlier. Which is fine, we can always take that back later. And once more, this I would say is probably too deep, because the bunker texture itself, when it goes in, lowers everything, which is why actually I find Matt's method's probably a little bit trickier for me, because you sort the land out and then you put the bunker in and it affects the land further. So I'd probably be raising this a little bit more, but this one very much is only visual. And again, you can probably just pop middle bit up, and you can see the other side, because it's so tight, this corner, and we've gone so steep, this is way too low. So we'll probably raise it up again, and I'll probably use exactly the same method as before. So the hard brush, the inside of this, that circle, means it's going to come up to like 100% of what you do, and then the fuzzier bits are just where it's having less and less and less of an impact. So we want the back of the bunker to come, the bottom of the bunker to come up a little bit, but not so much anything else. Probably not a great way to do this. In fact, I'd most likely start over again with this bunker because it's just gotten out of hand. Or we just go for this kind of fuzzy raise brush and just bring everything up here. But again, you'll notice because we're working so much with the sand, it's becoming really difficult, because now we've got areas that have gone higher, areas that have gone lower. So really at this stage, it's kind of you either lump it or you redo it. Now for me, that's why I prefer this version, where you're just doing you get the land roughly where you want it and then run the flattened brush through once, rather than this one where I find I just get a lot deeper, a lot quicker than I want to. So yeah, in terms of different shapes, there's this is not my strength at all. If you want a cleaner look, a lot of it is about combining these shapes in nice little ways. So if we found a bit of land, it might be popping a circle brush down, seeing roughly where that is, find another one. JC and I did this a lot on Old Oldcombe Village, and just trying to combine shapes in a way that made interesting ones that still, because they're quite large shapes, played well together. And you can still work on the kind of getting some sort of a finger going with these as well. It's not, I wouldn't say I find this as natural, but it's definitely a way to do it. I also find that it's harder to repeat for me because I'm basically just placing shapes pretty randomly. There are guys who are really good at it. Syndra's really good at this sort of style. His bunkers, shapes-wise, look really good for me. And again, at the bottom, you can then go to this kind of more curved shape. It's slightly trickier the fuzzier the brushes get. But you can see roughly what we're working towards. Now that might be a kind of nice clean look sort of shape that if you combine it with the sculpting could work out really well. So I guess, in summary, I'll get rid of that one, all of this. Right, in summary, we've seen one okay bunker, I would say, one where it's gotten way out of hand, and at this point, what I would be doing is very much going bunker brush, area select, get rid of all of it, because it's done way more than we wanted it to. I'd probably then be going to flatten and just rework the land, get it closer back to where we want it to be, and go again, because that one, you've got to know when something's a lost cause, and that one was. But we've got this one and so we kind of got that hillside back as well, so we can try again if we want. Putting one bunker in front of another, so like layering them, is really, really tough. What else? If you are going to sculpt inside the bunker, so sculpt, flatten, fuzzy brush at 0, and just run it through, click and hold once. Don't get too close to the sides, because that can tend to make it just get a little bit more jagged and tearing those textures a little bit in the way that this one is starting to do. Most of your work should be raised brush outside of the bunkers, and making the land that houses the bunker look natural is key. And finally, if you're going to go right with a green side bunker, give yourself enough space to work between green and bunker. And part of the problem we've had with this one is we haven't, even knowing that, we haven't given it enough. I'd probably be wanting to take all of this, and you can select an entire bunker and move it, but I'd probably be wanting to move all of this maybe to about there. It doesn't look like much of a difference, but that will make our life a lot easier in terms of sculpting, because we can now bump this way up without affecting what's happening on the green, and it's still punishing the same shots. So yeah, I'm going to cut the stream now, but that's kind of my take on bunkers and sculpting and a few things, and it's not particularly natural. In all honesty, the way I actually tend to do my bunkers a lot at the moment has been, and different people will use different ones. I've always loved this little gingerbread man fella, and just spinning and spamming in a rough shape that I know will, and then kind of going from there. I'd still, with that one, tend to be doing an idea of roughly where I want it to be and how I want it to be orientated. Probably still do something like this, where we're kind of getting an idea of how we want it to be angled, how we want it to draw out, etc. And then within that, but really any of them work, like just play around with things. Still spinning, clicking, etc. For me, like we talked about the circle brush giving you jaggedy edges, this one gives you even more so, but it's just a bit more random. And then probably tidying up from there. I've always quite liked this sort of style. It's how I did them on Kayuma and Marlet. Both of them very different types of courses, but the same sorts of things. And you can still do the odd little single clicks with them or combine with other brushes, etc. I've seen Pithy, so Dan Griffith will do this one quite a bit and go with kind of like more jaggedy up and down movements, which has worked out really nicely for him on, I think he used that on St. Cyrus and possibly Saxondale, I'm not entirely sure. I think the way with bunker shapes is just experiment and like don't be afraid to smash brushes or what have you down. You can do them with splines. It's worth bearing in mind that it's really hard to get tight shapes with splines, and you often have to exaggerate quite a lot how much space you leave between things. So like if we look at that, that doesn't look anything like the shape that it's going to produce. It can work. The benefit of splines is that you can lay fairway right next to them. For whatever reason, it just doesn't work otherwise. Whereas that will lead straight into the bunker, which is a great look if you're going for so sandbelt courses tend to do that a lot, and have greens cutting into bunkers and vice versa as well. To be honest, I'd stay away from splined bunkers for a while. They're not the friendliest of things to work with. In any case, I'm going to cut the stream here and then I'm going to load, and hopefully taking off OBS Studio and video recording will make it all work a little bit easier. And then I'm going to go to the major course in a sec. So catch you shortly.